Amazing. Well, thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Antonio. Thanks everyone here for being here. So I was told that some of you guys are like all over the world, and I think that's really great. That some of you are like in Spain and Italy. My parents now live in Spain, actually, in Madrid. So so I'd love to talk about that in the Q&A if you guys want. So let me share the presentation. All right. So well, so how I like to begin with this is everybody here has been to a grocery store around the world, no matter where, and it probably was a good experience, or at least it was a short experience, where you just bought what you needed and you left. And that was not the experience that I had when I was living in Venezuela just 6 years ago, when I was your age in high school as well. This is what a grocery store used to look like. It was completely empty in half of the aisles. I couldn't even go to the grocery store the day I wanted to go to the grocery store. You can, maybe you'll go with your parents, maybe you'll go by yourself, but you don't think about which day it is in order to buy toilet paper or meat or fruits. In Venezuela, part of the rationing system of our goods and services was that the government would assign you a day of the week in which you could go to the grocery store. Based on my ID number, I could only go Mondays and Saturdays. And still, there were no things. And still, you had to line up for hours. Now, the question is, how, in a country like Venezuela, does that happen? How, this is a picture of me the last time I was in Venezuela in 2017. You see me with a pack of cash in my hand, right? That was the price of one movie ticket. One movie ticket was that full pack of cash. Now that is what hyperinflation looks like. Can you imagine if you had to take a pack of $100 bills like that wouldn't even fit in your pocket, and that would be the price of one movie ticket in any movie theater in the country? That's what it was. That was our largest denomination bill. This isn't like $1 equivalent. This is like the largest one we had in the moment. And Venezuela, the country with the largest oil reserves in the world, lines up for gasoline all over the country. This is a picture in Caracas of 2 years ago of lining up for gasoline. It's still today like that. Sometimes people sleep in the line inside their cars, risking them robbery and a lot of terrible things that happen in those lines. And of course, high inflation, shortages of goods, lack of electricity, water, and then just the general safety have led to millions of people leaving our country. Venezuela today is the largest refugee crisis in the planet, with 7 million people, according to the United Nations, outside our country. This is more than there are Ukrainian refugees, more than there are Syrian refugees outside of Syria. And there is no war in Venezuela. There is no chemical weapon being used against the population, unlike in Ukraine and Syria, respectively. What there is a government that has obliterated our economy. No, but Venezuela didn't used to be this way. Venezuela used to be a good place to live. It was such a good place to live that people from other countries came to ours instead of the opposite that's happening today. This picture is the picture of the Veracruz vessel, which was a ship that brought people from Spain to Venezuela in the 1950s. It was the ship that my grandfather my mom's father took in February 1956 when he immigrated from Galicia in Spain to Venezuela. And this is what Caracas used to look like. Caracas in 1953 had more cars per capita than New York City. I learned this not by Google, actually. I was in my university library, and I picked up a book and I checked it out, which was called Venezuela, Land of Opportunity. It was a book written by Americans who visited Venezuela and who collected economic statistics of different countries. And they put, like data on how many cars were there, what was the population, how much did people in each profession make. And I found through that book that there were more cars in Venezuela based for the size of its population, in Caracas, the capital, than in New York. Isn't that incredible? Like, that's a measure of prosperity. In the 1950s, owning a car was being part of the middle class, of being part of the upper class. So that was what was happening in our country. A secretary in an office made more in US dollars in Caracas than in the United States, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics back in the 50s. So, of course, people from all over the world immigrated to Venezuela. It was a good place to be. This is in the right. The man in the right is my grandfather in the parking lot where he washed cars for a living with two of his clients. And imagine that somebody like him who had no high school degree could immigrate to another country at 17 and not only, got a job and wash cars, which is, a low-skilled job, but it is a job that allowed him to save half of his income and send it in remittances to his family abroad. Can you imagine any American today saving half of their income without a high school diploma? I think that would be impossible in our country today even. And that was possible in Venezuela. From my dad's side, my dad's father came from Italy in the same year as well, 1956. And of course, the Italian stereotype, he made shoes. And this is a picture of him making shoes by hand, which is how they used to be made. And he was able to work making shoes by hand, being paid by the pair of shoes that he made, and then being able to buy shares in the own company that he worked at, and then ultimately buy his own shop. So this is just some pictures of my family over time. And of course, of me and my parents in the right. And then a recent, more, probably I think the last picture with my mom's side of the family in 2016, with my grandparents, cousins, uncle. And then, the terrible situation in our country, the lack of opportunity, the expectation that if I graduated from college in Venezuela, the best hope that I would have had would have been to feed myself, was what drove me to look for ways to live, and specifically to come to the United States, not Europe, not anywhere else. And I did it I got a full ride scholarship to study in Indiana for undergrad. And I came, and that was my picture leaving Venezuela in the airport by myself. And so the question, guys, here is, how does the country with largest oil reserves in the planet, that used to be a democracy, that used to be rich, that people from all over the world used to come, how does that country go from that to one of the poorest countries in the planet? And in a period of just 20 years. Because that happened since approximately 1999 until today. How does that happen? And the answer to that is the policies implemented by the government. Famines and this disaster, this is no natural disaster. This is no, no spell. This is man-made. And the men who made this were the people who implemented these policies that I'm going to tell you guys about. The number one is nationalizations. What is a nationalization? It's the government taking over your business. It's literally Hugo Chavez, the president and dictator of Venezuela until 2013, going around the streets pointing at your building and saying expropiase, which means expropriated, which means the government takes over your property. They may or may not compensate you. Some people get compensated, not enough, of course, but then some people didn't get anything. And it was not just arbitrary like that. They began with the large businesses, they took banks, they took large manufacturers, they took a lot of agricultural businesses, a lot of farmers, and whatever they call the strategic industries, everything that used to be, the oil was, Venezuela since the 70s had a state-owned oil company, but then most things were privatized in the 90s, and then Chavez took over everything again for the state around 2007. So the government owned all the oil revenue, manufacturing companies, grocery stores, banks, everything you can imagine. In addition to, of course, schools, hospitals, everything government owned. Then a lot of things were still privately owned, of course. All the retail stores, things like that were privately owned. There were still private banks. There were still, some small scale manufacturers and some farms. To those private businesses, the government would tell you how much you could charge. They would control your prices. Not only would they tell you how much you could charge, but if you needed to import or export abroad, they controlled all international trade and the exchange rate of the currency that you could use, and who could trade with which countries and how much they could trade. So it was total control even of the private sector. And then to fulfill their promises of giving free things to the population, free healthcare, free education, free food, free housing, free electricity, free gasoline, everything you can imagine, the government just spent a lot of money. And of course, Venezuela was receiving a lot of oil revenue, which helped that they had all this oil revenue. But the amount of spending was such that not even all the oil revenue in the middle of high oil prices was enough to cover that spending. And so what the Chavista regime pursued was printing money. And, if printing money was the solution to our problems, we would have already all be, have a Ferrari or be rich. So right, if all it took to make a country rich was print money, we wouldn't have problems today. And the reality is that printing money doesn't do anything. Money is just pieces of paper. Money doesn't have inherent value. Money represents the value of actual things we produce. What do we produce? Shoes, food. We produce services like a haircut or advice. Even anything that is like education is something we produce, that we teach. Walking a dog, that's a service that has some value. And money is simply the means of exchange for the value of those services with each other. If we didn't have money, we would go back to the era of, maybe 10,000 years ago, where we bartered. What is barter? Where, if you want an apple and I want a pear, and you have a pear and I have an apple, we exchange them, right? That's what bartering is. The problem with bartering is what we call in economics like the double coincidence of preferences. Which means that the other person needs to have something that you need, and you need to have something that they need. And that's very unlikely to happen. Not everybody cuts hair, and the people who cut hair might not need economic advice, which is what I can provide. So they will never give me a haircut because I don't have what they need. And so humans created money, which it can be cash, but it used to be gold, it used to be salt, tobacco leaves. Money can be anything. And it's just a means of exchange that we all accept in exchange of our services. That's it. If you just create more money, you just change the price of things, but you're not producing more, you're just redistributing things. And what Venezuela did was that they redistributed so much that they left us all without anything. Inflation went up so high because of the money printing that my family's income went from $2,000 to $3,000 a month in the early 2000s to $100 a month in 2016. Today, the median Venezuelan family makes less than $100 a month. How do they survive? Well, right now they're surviving a little better because they're receiving remittances from the 7 million of us who live outside the country. Just like Cuba, Venezuela has become a parasitic economy that really lives off the people who live outside to send things inside. And so that is what destroyed us. Now, I call this socialism. Why do I call this socialism? Because Venezuela's economic freedom, this is a good source. For example, the Fraser Institute is a Canadian think tank. It's the only institution in the world that has tried to measure economic freedom for the longest period of time. So they began they have some rankings from the 50s, but from Venezuela began in 1970. And Venezuela in 1970 was the 10th freest economy in the world. That means if you think of capitalism and socialism as a continuum, it's not a black and white switch. It's a continuum, right? It's a matter of degree. Venezuela was in the one end of the least regulated, less government spending, less taxation in 1970. That's when Venezuela was the richest country in Latin America, one of the richest in the planet. Fast forward to 2021, and Venezuela is the second to last in the ranking. Not all the countries are ranked, but Venezuela is just behind one other country, 165th place. So of course Venezuela became a socialist country. Now, why? Let me explain this concept more clearly so that we understand the words and what they mean, right? Socialism, according to Marx, if you read the Communist Manifesto or Capital, is government ownership of the means of production. That's the basic condition for a socialist economy. Venezuela took over, the government took over the means of production, and not all of them, of course. So you could say it was not fully socialist, but nothing is fully socialist or fully capitalist anyway. But it moved in that direction, and everything that was private was heavily government regulated anyway. So that's what happened in Venezuela. More of our income was spent by the government as a share of what we made. And so that is what I call socialism. Socialism is not the government doing things, okay? Which is, I think it's a big problem that people think, the government builds the road, so that's socialism. No, because that's not a means of production, and in any case, it's actually the government's role in a free economy to provide what we call actual public goods. Education is not a public good, but we can talk about that if you guys want it in the Q&A, and we can talk about what the definition of public goods is. But anyway, Venezuela went from one of the freest to one of the least free economies. And a lot of people have begun blaming the crisis in Venezuela on things other than socialism. And so here is what I want to tell you why that is wrong, why socialism is truly a culprit. It's not even that it's a corrupt government. It's not even that it's an oil country or an oil-dependent country, or that US sanctions destroyed us, right? I've heard all these arguments, and it's very easy to debunk. Why? Because there are many other examples of countries that went through similar situations than Venezuela. Let's begin with the easiest to debunk, the oil industry. Some people think that because Venezuela is an oil-dependent country, then when oil prices go down, the Venezuelan economy just goes bust. And that's true. Most oil-dependent countries suffer when oil prices go down. And in 2014, when the Venezuelan crisis became really bad, even though it was already bad before 2014, I can tell you, I lived there. It's true that things got worse. But I never saw a single person escaping Saudi Arabia because they were going hungry. I never saw a single person escaping, the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, because they were going hungry after oil prices went down. Why aren't there millions of refugees from the Arab countries who are rich on oil producers? Certainly, it's not the fact that oil prices went down that made millions of Venezuelans leave, just by that sense. Second, Many people blame US sanctions. They say that it's the United States' fault that Venezuela is the way it is. They say that, but America is not importing oil from Venezuela anymore. Though now they're about to start, thanks to Biden. But they're not importing oil anymore. All these other countries took the financial assets of Venezuela. Well, let's say something else here. Venezuela is not sanctioned like Cuba, Iran, or many other countries are. If you want to send food, medicine right now, home to home, there are companies in Miami, in Houston especially, that send packages home to home in Venezuela. Anything you want, there are no limits on the amount of money you can send. People send money, people send food, people send medicines. Not only that, but the sanctions really affected only the government. What did they do? The oil is owned by the government. And the government was not spending it really on the population. They were just stealing it. We're talking about over $1 trillion that they've stolen in the last 20 years. Now that, $1 trillion sounds like a number that we can't understand, but so that you think of what $1 trillion is. $1 trillion, and I'll make the calculation very quickly in my phone, is enough money to give over $3,000 to every single American in this country. For Venezuelans, it would be over $30,000 per Venezuelan because we have a tenth of the population. So they stole $30,000 from every person. That would have been enough money to save us all from the starvation and the disaster that we went through. So the problem is not the sanctions that took the financial assets of some corrupt elite members who took their bank accounts. That has nothing to do with the 30 million of us who lived in the country. It has nothing to do with the oil. Now, some make a more nuanced argument and say it's because this is a corrupt government. They stole the money, Daniel. If I was in power, I am a good socialist. I would redistribute things fairly. And that's a very funny argument to me because it's an argument that has never happened. But even if theoretically you were a good person, if the government takes over the means of production, the government just doesn't have the same incentives of private businesses. Because what happens when you have a company? What is your goal? You may have some personal goals, but your goal is to maximize the amount of money you make. You want to make as much profit as you can if you have a for-profit enterprise. What is the goal, and how do you do that? You do that by increasing production, sales, and reducing costs. That's how you maximize profit. How do you reduce costs? You innovate. You try to use as fewer resources as you can to make production more efficient. How do you sell more? You produce more. So you need to hire people to the degree that the cost is worth it to produce more things. What happens in a government-owned enterprise? They're not maximizing profit. They're maximizing votes. How do they maximize votes? They hire more people than they need. They lower the prices below cost, and they don't require that the workers actually work. And that's exactly what happened in every single government enterprise in Venezuela. The workers just stopped working. Why? Because why would the government require them to work? They want them just to vote for them. You better keep them happy, not working, just scratching their backs, sitting down, chilling. It's all fine. And that's what happened. I used to drive from Caracas to the city where my parents' gas station was at. That was what they did for a living. They had a gas station. And there used to be a lot of fields of sugarcane in the highway. The government took over all those fields. They put greenhouses in a tropical country, mind you. I don't know why you need a greenhouse in a tropical country. And all the sugarcane disappeared, and now the greenhouses were empty for over a decade. Nothing. Everything that was producing stopped producing. And they had a huge sign in the highway that they put up that said in a big red heart, "Made in socialism." It was perfect. It was actually made in socialism. The total destruction of our agricultural sector. And so it is not the corruption, it is the incentives. There are plenty of corrupt countries. Do you think Iran is not a corrupt country? Not only is Iran corrupt, but it is also a theocratic, which means religious dictatorship. with no women's rights, oil dependent, and more sanctioned than any country in the planet is Iran. Okay, you can't even send mail to Iran. Yet, I don't see millions of Iranians walking out of their country to Azerbaijan or Turkey. Yes, there are political problems. There's a lot of protests. It's not a good place to live. But people are not starving in Iran. Why aren't they? Because Iran is not a socialist country. Iran respects private property. And Iran allows you to start businesses. Very different from Venezuela. And so, guys, why does any of this matter to you? That's the big question. Well, this matters because there are people in this country who want to promote the ideas that I fled from. The ideas that took away my electricity, took away my water, made me suffer from millions % inflation. And this is an op-ed published in 2013, titled Hugo Chavez's Economic Miracle, as you can read. And, they were praising his record economically. Mind you, in 2013, Venezuela had 50% inflation. People here are screaming and complaining over 8% inflation. This is 50%. That means that something that used to cost $10 today, next year will cost 15. And the following, 7.5, 20, 22.5, and so on. That's what was the record in 2013. Then it kept shooting up. There was no food in the grocery stores in 2013. I had to line up. There was huge crime everywhere in the country. It was not a miracle, it was a nightmare. Yet, you say, why do I care what this stranger writes in a magazine in the United States? Like, who is he? Why does this matter to me? Well, this man is David Sirota, who was the chief advisor of the presidential campaign of Bernie Sanders in 2020. And he thought that Venezuela was an economic miracle. He's still a writer. He's still very well known and goes on TV all the time. There's an organization in this country called the Democratic Socialists of America. The DSA are actual supporters of the Maduro regime. How do I know this? Not only do they support the same policies, but they actually met with Maduro last year in the summer, and they went to Venezuela, got an award from Maduro. This is a picture that they posted in their social media. This is no secret. They are bragging about this. Imagine a group of people, American citizens, who travel to a country that is under a dictatorship and meet with a dictator who kills people and take selfies with him, pictures, shaking hands. This was in the middle of the pandemic, so, fist bump or whatever. This is a mass murder. So how come the people who say that they want to turn us into Denmark meet with the president of Venezuela and not with the prime minister of Denmark? It's interesting how things work, right? So just to finish, and before we go into the Q&A, because I know you guys have something else later too, and please get, if you have any questions, make sure to start thinking and tell me after. A lot of people don't really want to turn America into an actual socialist country. They just think that socialism is what the Nordic countries do. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, usually. And well, these countries are not socialist, and I'll explain you why. But also the people who say that they want to turn us into these countries are not proposing the policies that these countries are implementing. For example, did you know that all these supposedly socialist countries of Nordic Europe charge their corporations lower taxes than the United States? A corporation in Norway pays lower taxes than a corporation in the United States of America. Isn't that incredible? Not only that, but where do they get their money then? They don't get it from corporations or the rich. They get it from the average worker. They make everybody pay a very high payroll tax. Here we have approximately 12% to 14% in payroll taxes with Medicare and Social Security. They have 30% payroll taxes. That is a tax everybody pays, okay? Not just that. Here you have a sales tax of approximately 7%, depending on the state and the municipality. In those countries, the sales tax is over 20%. Everybody pays sales tax. It's not for the rich. So how do they finance all these welfare programs that they supposedly have that we don't? Yeah, they have somewhat generous welfare programs than we do, but they finance them by taxing the poor. So they're not really redistributing from rich to poor. They're taking away your own money and giving it back to you. It's a very different system. And it's a system that has advantages and many disadvantages too. But it is not the system that we're being told we can have. In fact, the Nordic countries are some of the countries with the lowest taxes on their workers of Europe. If you wanted to turn us into like what many democratic socialists want to propose here, it's not really Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. It's more like Belgium and Germany. It's a different system. And then these countries run balanced budgets. They have much lower debt as percent of their economy, many times smaller. Why? Because they understand that fiscal responsibility leads to growth, because you take less money out of the debt market, and then private banks have more money to lend and grow private businesses. And so I've never heard a socialist ever say that we need to balance the American budget, right? But that's exactly what these supposedly socialist countries do. And finally, this is something where I think that we for sure need to imitate the Nordic countries. It's much easier to start a business today in Nordic Europe than in the United States. Unfortunately, regulation after regulation, presidency after presidency, Congress after Congress, state after state has passed regulations over the last several decades that have put America, according to the World Bank, in just the 55th place in the world based on how easy it is to start a business. Where the first place is the easiest place in the world to start one, Americans in the 55th spot. We're an average country today, unfortunately. And I don't think America should ever conform to being an average country. So I'm going to stop here and say something else that, I began telling you guys about how it was so difficult to find things in the grocery store in Venezuela, and how we didn't have power, we didn't have water many times. For water was the worst. Sometimes I went several weeks without water. We had to carry it upstairs when there was no electricity. We went from being living a normal life like many of you do to living like in the Middle Ages. So my challenge to you is that you see the things around you differently. That when you go to the grocery store, you think, wow, what a miracle it is that there are all these things available to me, all these options everywhere around I look. And this is all possible without government force. This is all out of the voluntary exchange of people pursuing their own self-interest. That is what Adam Smith calls the invisible hand in The Wealth of Nations. The invisible hand is that every one of us pursuing our own self-interest ends up furthering the common interest of the other. And that's what we have achieved in this country. And that doesn't mean that we're perfect, but it means that we need to be grateful for what we have and understand that if we want to change things, we cannot imitate the people who destroyed their own countries. We have to be smart about it. Thanks, guys. Now, if you have any questions.
Yes, I've actually gotten some questions emailed to me, and I'll unmute Dr. Roca if he wants to add anything right now. Thank you for that. That was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, so thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Daniel, for agreeing to share your story, because I think it's more relevant today than perhaps even it was 50 or 60 years ago when my parents fled Cuba and the communist regime that ensued and still controls Cuba. So I wanna thank you for your time. I know your time was valuable today. You just got off of a plane. You're on your way to another meeting. But I want to invite you back and to come and speak to us again, to update us on your dissident project. And I think Ralph will maybe post the dissident project and distribute it to our students. But what you're talking about is very, very much relevant in today's politics, unfortunately, around the world. So thanks again. Thank you, open up the floor to any students that would like to ask some questions.
Absolutely. We have some that just got emailed, and I was actually wondering this question myself. One of the kids wanted to know, what are some things, subtle things that we should maybe notice in whatever countries that we're in, that this is kind of on the horizon? What are some things that you would think that we should notice?
Yeah, it's all about what I call the politics of envy. You know, socialism comes from envy, really. It comes from, instead of you wanting to be better, you want to take somebody else's success. And so it's that resentment that leads you to then support people who will use government force to take away that success from those people to give it to you. And at the end, you both end up worse off. And so that is anything that comes from trying to divide people to between oppressor and oppressed. Basically, the narrative that the rich are rich because the poor are poor, which is false. Today, we have the lowest extreme poverty in world history, thanks to the freedom that we have achieved. That doesn't mean that everything's perfect or that the government doesn't have a role in things to do, but we should never punish success. We should try to encourage success. And that's the opposite of what socialism does.
And it's weird. I mean, we noticed that. I mean, you had mentioned this in some of, like, with the Bernie Sanders and all that, where it's just like this utopian suggestion, this golden apple, like right in front of you, that there's no strings attached with that. So one of the kids wanted to know, is your family all out of Venezuela?
Yes, my closest family is all out of Venezuela. I'm the only one in the US, but most of them are now living in Spain and in Italy.
Okay. And we have a question here. They want to know, do the Venezuelan governments, do they practice much persecution and repression against anyone who has an opposition, like the church?
Yeah. So it's not to the degree of Cuba or say China, but it's certainly important. So they won't mind if you have conversations or meet with groups of people in your homes. That's going to be okay. Or if you go to church, but they will mind if you organize a protest, and they'll certainly capture you and disappear you if you do that. Some people, it also depends. Venezuela functions like an oligarchy now, where there's a lot of people in power. It's not just Maduro. And so if you bother personally one of the people who has a lot of power, they will make sure you are taken out as well. And for example, a big case recently was a comedian. She posted videos mocking members of the regime, really funny videos. She was really good. She was extremely offensive to these people, of course. And now nobody knows where she is. That's what happens.
That is absolutely terrifying, that occurs. One of our students wanted to know that she says, I know a lot of people who say that they're anti-capitalist because capitalism, in their words, is unfair because it creates social classes. How could you defend against that argument? Because I'm sure you hear that all the time.
That is an excellent question. And that is whether, I don't think inequality is unfair. In fact, I think the opposite. I think inequality is fair. And that is a thing that I think a lot of young people are being lied to and put in their heads. We're not all the same. And that doesn't mean better or worse. It just means different. Some people want to be doctors. Some people want to be teachers. And the reality is that how much we're compensated for our services depends, yes, on our effort, but it also depends on how many other people can do that same thing. And of course, a professional soccer player is going to make millions of dollars because very few people have the skills to become a professional soccer player. And I don't think that it's unfair that professional soccer players make a lot of money or more than I will ever make. I think that's good for them, man. We all have a role and we all have our different skills. And we also all make different choices. Most income inequality in the United States, the one that is the headline, like the top 10% versus the top whatever, that's not explained by, even some underlying natural skill, and this is just like a biological difference of social class. It's really explained both by hours worked, age. Young people tend to be poor, not because they're actually poor, but because they're young and in school. You know, the people who make money are usually in their 50s and 40s, because that's the prime age years, and you will get there too. So a lot of the problems with like this narrative that inequality is increasing, that it's unfair, that the rich are getting all the gains, it's really a measurement problem. And I can share with you guys some videos that explain these mathematical mistakes that people use with the data. But fundamentally, inequality is not unfair. We all make different choices. The question is, what's the source of inequality? If the source of inequality is that somebody is doing something fraudulently or stealing, then of course that's unfair. But it's not unfair because it's unequal. It's unfair because of the means to achieving that wealth, right? I don't think it's unfair that Bill Gates became a billionaire, but because he sold me computers, I chose to buy them, and I'm better off because I gave him my money, because now I have a computer. So we're both better off.
That's a very wonderful point. We'll go with two more student questions. This comes from Paul, and Paul is in Spain, where you said your family is. Paul, you should be able to unmute. You had a very good question. Go ahead, friend.
Good afternoon. My question is, did you study economics because of the situation of Venezuela?
Yes, I do. That's what really pushed me to study economics since undergrad. And then after that, now in grad school as well. So I graduated with my bachelor's in December 2019, worked for a little bit, and then started my PhD in economics in the middle of the pandemic at Columbia. Now I live in New York City. And it was because of that. You know, I became very interested in why these crises happen. I was more interested in macroeconomics before, inflation, unemployment, and then over time I became more interested in microeconomics. So more like why people make choices. So that's what I'm doing. Where are you at, Paul, in Spain?
Here, let me unmute Paul. Let me go back to Paul. Paul, go ahead and you can answer that question.
Yeah, I'm in, Catalonia.
What
north,
part?
In, 50 kilometers from Barcelona.
Okay. My cousins live in Barcelona now, two of them and their kids. It's a very nice area. That's awesome.
That's great. We have one final question. This comes from one of your fellow countrymen. This is Sergio. And Sergio, you had a pretty good question. Go ahead to unmute to talk to Daniel here.
Hello. So not me, because I was born here, but my family also came here to Spain from Venezuela. And mostly because because of the situation of the country, and they wanted to give me a better future than I would have reached in Venezuela. And I would like you to ask how did you feel when you got to the US?
I felt really great. Sometimes people are like, oh, you're here by yourself, or like it's difficult, and I'm like, it was not difficult at all. It was not difficult. So nothing is the same, right? Culture is different, a lot of things are different, but just the ability to be able to walk in the street and not being afraid of that somebody's gonna rob you and kill you, that's an immediate improvement of your quality of life and happiness and tranquility. Not being worried that when you get home there's not going to be electricity or water, not being worried that you are going to that you need to like accumulate things in your house of food, because then you're not going to be able to buy them when you need them. Like you just lose like several pounds of weight, okay, in peace. And so that really helped me. And so it was a good experience. It's still a great experience. I'm sure it was for your parents too in Spain. A lot of Venezuelans have gone to Spain. I was so shocked because, my grandparents were from Galicia, and I visited Galicia. The only time I've ever gone was in 2018, and I went with them, and they saw their siblings for the first time in so many decades. It was a beautiful thing. And we went to some restaurants in Orense, and it was shocking that basically all the like waiters were Venezuelan. Like the Venezuelans have become like in Spain have become like the Mexicans in the United States, because we all went to to the same place, and now we're all working all the jobs. But that's the natural process of immigration and assimilation. And it's, it is what it is. It's the history of humankind, right? That we live because of these terrible governments. And hopefully we will be at some point in a place where there will be nowhere to flee from, because there will be no, the natural state. I would have loved if this has never happened and I didn't ever had the need to come to America, and maybe all my family would be in the same place in Caracas, and that would have been a beautiful thing. It's not possible, and so I'm grateful to be here still.
Well, we're grateful that you spent the time with us today. This was very informational and motivational. I have the Dissident Project website in the chat for everybody, so be sure to check that out. We're going to process this footage and send it out to everyone who registered for this. And Daniel, from the bottom of our hearts, we cannot thank you enough for spending some of your valuable time with us today. And Dr. Roca, do you have anything to add?
No, thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you, Ralph, for putting this together, and for all of our students from the United States and dual diploma from around the world for joining.
Thank you, guys. Ralph, would you mind allowing me sharing the screen to show I have my social media here and the website too? So I would love to show
You are
the
good.
screen.
Go ahead.
So in case you guys want to get in touch, I have Twitter, this is our website, and then you can also email me with any questions that you guys want, and I'm very happy to answer them. Yeah.
Wonderful.
That
Thank you so much.
Absolutely wonderful. And before we let you go, I'm going to allow everyone to unmute themselves, and then I'll end the meeting for all. Can we all say thank you to Daniel for taking time out of his busy day to talk to you guys today?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Bye.